It's important that you understand precedence, especially when you're going to be performing mathematical operations in PHP. Precedence refers to the order in which a series of calculations are executed. For example, if I create a new variable and type in 10 minus 4 divided by 2, if we were reading this, we would subtract 4 from 10, giving us 6, and we would divide by 2, thinking that the answer would actually be 3. But when we actually print this to the page, you can see that my answer is 8. And the reason why is because division takes precedence over subtraction. So when we're talking about the most common mathematical operators, plus, minus, multiplication, and division, know that multiplication and division will always take precedence over subtraction. Now, if we wanted to ensure our answer was 3, all we have to do is add some parentheses. When I add parentheses like this and save the page, you can see that now the answer is 3. Parentheses will always take precedence over any other operator. So anytime you want to ensure that a particular part of your calculations is executed before another, then just surround those in parentheses. When you use parentheses in your calculations, you can ensure that you never see particular results due to precedence issues. In addition, you can also use parentheses to be used to rewrite complex calculations in fewer lines of code. I showed you some of those examples in one of our previous exercises. When you use parentheses, especially when the mathematical calculations are more complex, make sure that you match your parentheses consistently as you create your formulas. Every opening parentheses is going to require a closing parentheses. If you do not do this, you're going to have parse errors. In addition to understanding parentheses, it's also important that you understand incrementing and decrementing a number. PHP, like most programming languages, is going to include shortcuts that let you avoid ugly constructs. So instead of writing something like this, when I need to increase the value of a variable by 1, and this is also referred to as an incremental adjustment, or if we want to decrease the value of a variable by 1, which is referred to as a decremental adjustment, you can either use plus plus or minus minus. So instead of writing the line of code I just wrote, I could write something that looks like this. And that would either add 1 to the value of number 2 or subtract 1 to the value of number 2. So let's actually plug in some values so we can see how this would work. I'll get rid of these lines of code and we're going to create a variable, and I'll just call my variable var, and I'm going to set it equal to 15. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to, let's just print the value of var to the page. And because I'm going to have some additional lines of code, I'm going to print a BR tag so that I can separate my statements. So currently, if we refresh and look at this, it's going to say 315. Now the reason that the 15 is right next to the 3 is because I didn't print a variable up here. So I'll add that code in as well, just to separate things out. So there we have the first example, and here is our new example. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to increment the var variable by 1. So we do that by simply writing var plus plus, and now we'll print the new value of var. So I'm just going to keep repeating my print statement. And if we save, we should see 16, which we do. And if I keep doing this multiple times, it's just going to keep increasing the value of that variable by 1 every time. As I mentioned before, we can also subtract the values, and we do that by using the minus minus. So if I go ahead and plug that in, we should expect to find that the new variable that is printed is going to be 16 because it's subtracting 1 from the previous version, which was 17. So if we were working with variables, we might create a variable, and I'll call this just num, and I'm going to make it equal to 1. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to use num, and I'm going to say num plus 1. So we would expect that the new value of num to be 2, which it is. Now instead of writing this line of code right here, I could use I could increment the variable, which is a much more concise way to write the code, and this is definitely more of a best practice way. So when we do that, we're going to get the same value. If I change the value of num to 7, we should expect that number to change to 8, which it does. So incrementing or decrementing a number is a common operation, and we often use the plus plus or the minus minus. Functionality-wise, it doesn't matter whether we use the line of code that looks like this or the more abbreviated version, but the more abbreviated version is more professional and more common as well. Oftentimes, we'll use the incrementing and decrementing operators in conjunction with loops, and we'll look at that a little bit later on in the course. In addition to incrementing and decrementing values, PHP also supports a combination of mathematical and assignment operators. These are going to be things like this: plus equals, minus equals, multiplication equals, and division equals. Each will assign a value to a variable by performing a calculation on it. So let me just show you what that looks like. I'm going to create another new variable to use for this example. So as you would expect, if I go ahead and print the value of num2 should have a value of 5. And there it is, it's set to 5. So initially I set num2 to 0, and then I'm just setting num2 equal to the value of num2, which is 0, and adding 5. We could write this exact same calculation a little bit more concisely by writing it like this. So if I save and we refresh, you can see that the value of num5 doesn't change. Let's change this number to something else like 8. So now we will expect the bottom number to become an 8, which it does. And we're kind of doing the same thing as the plus plus. Plus plus is always going to increment by 1. If you want to increment by something other than 1, you'll use the plus equal. So that's just simply going to take the current value and then add and reassign it to whatever the new value is. And we could change these numbers up, obviously, if I make num2 equal to 12, and if I change this to a minus 8, num2 should change to 4, which it does. And we could also perform some sort of multiplication. So if I multiply 12 by 2, we should get 24, which we do. And then we can divide as well. So if I use the / here and I divide by 2, that should give me a result of 6, which it does. So obviously, any of these methods that we just talked about can be great for incrementing and decrementing, or using arithmetic assignment operators and combining the mathematical assignment operators together. You can be much more concise with your code. And you will see many of these examples used in more involved scripts that we're going to be writing in the future.